Today, we are 12,000 Nunavimmiut living in a homeland that's rapidly changing. To prepare for a better future, let's look at some important events in our past.
A good place to begin is when we had to stand up for Inuktitut, our language, our identity. This is the story of what happened when we faced Bill 101.
In 1975, a new chapter began in our history when a brave group of young Inuit leaders concluded the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement, the JBNQA.
But even as they signed, they knew a real challenge lay ahead.
The negotiations have now been completed, and although not all of the points that we had hoped to obtain have not been included, we are an adaptable people, and now we must make the greatest change of our history for our children and our children's children. Thank you.
By signing on to the JBNQA, our leaders put their faith in the province of Quebec, believing that they would secure our future alongside all other Quebecers. But then, only 1 year after the signing, big surprise, the Parti québécois won the provincial election. And then this.
La version amendée du projet de loi 1 sur la langue officielle sera déposée dès la semaine prochaine à l'Assemblée nationale.
French was to become the only official language of Quebec.
Ce que nous visons à corriger, à donner aux Québécois francophones, c'est le droit de travailler en français.
A law was underway that would upend our lives, undermine who we are.
Inuktitut hakkayanginta. Inuktitut kisiana uhaunata. Ilagingu yuwana kabunni. Inuhatigingu yugut. Piagabullu. Aknabut. Ilabut. Inuhatibullu. Inuktitut uhahatigingu nangitugut. Hausaringinatigu.
The next 6 months would put Nunavik on the map across Canada and beyond.
We Inuit spoke Inuktitut. School was all English. This new law, Bill 1, would change all that.
The Parti québécois had a very clear language policy, namely that French should be the language of Quebec, but also should be the language of the tribunals, of education, of health and public services, and of the justice.
Kavamaurnik aulatsi kanittu jangittuusti haningitutsuti aulatsigasuarniriyangit uvagunammini aulatsingaarutta.
I remember Charlie was trying to deliver to the premier, and he said, don't forget, we are Inuit here, and we have our own rights and our own traditions and language use, and we want that respected.
Kavamatu hakkulu kupiakkulu angi hattautingiluarninga affiasimammiutamatsuminga ineqqasitigasuartatinning itaga hallunaatitu tuviniu hattasimalegaluarsuta aguiguitituuriahaleratta Kupiak miulimaatsianu ilingalangalakman inuugaluarunluunni allaugaluarunluunni hallunaangugaluarunluunni guiguitituornimikisiani atuhattanialersuta tukitaaruti halauksiammata maligakkut taannatagaisuillequtigilaorsimajavut
Inuit katimatsigiartutut Quebec government ministerngannik Atihalauksimayo Camille Laurent.
The Parti québécois government told our leaders our language would be protected. Camille Laurent went to Fort Chimo and Puvirnituk and said as much. Perhaps we were naive, but we believed them.
Tatamanna takka isuittu hatta so tukisi jutsayu jaksutik tamatsumenga taimaita hatta simagatta taimeittu bihallutualluta pikaswaqtu saptenkkaluaqtugut imailinga jumi isumayutsayu jaagaluaqsutik kisiani taimaatsaina piusiraqfiu hatta tuviniunang miniuattini piusiraqfi haqasuaqtuyu jaaqnerijangi taanna naammagisimattangitnaaput tukisisimanaqpaanguyutsayu jaaqsutik.
Le Québec s'en va tranquillement vers une définition nationale.
In the South, it was a different story. The Parti Québécois rallied around its vision. The Inuit dissidents who had opposed the JBNQA supported the French language law. In Fort Chimo, things became tense.
What was eventually to become Makivik was at that time called the Northern Quebec Inuits Association, and there were 2 or 3 leaders with not too much experience, very young. And I felt a little bit aggressive. One has to say, they were very, very openly pushed by some of the leaders of the English community, whether it was in Ottawa or in Montreal. Some of the Anglophone lawyers I felt, were overstretching in terms of creating prejudice.
The battle over language raged throughout Quebec that summer of 1977. In August, the PQ government tabled its final version. Bill 1 became Bill 101.
Bill 101, Bill 101, Bill 101, Bill 101.
The revised bill came as a shock to our leaders.
Bill 101.
Our leaders were meeting in Sanikiluaq when the news hit them. The revised bill came as a shock.
Taanna taimailinga jumitakun na tao nakalauksem mapikuyaliaqajawa suaqtuujong inui piniarninganik hanok pikunna vilimaminut sukkiga suarneriyujaaqtaga ippigiyoloksem inunnutatsamani.
The only government compromise was a clause in the preamble that gave Aboriginal people the right to preserve and develop their original language and culture. It was not clear what that meant. It was not an exemption from the law. Our leaders felt betrayed.
Nunatinipugut sibulibin tanunangani ohawsakakpugunamminek piusakaksutalunammintinik. Kallunaaritioqunnalitauunivut amigangigiirtoq uiguitituqtugasanu hallaqaaqtaugiallallerluta taimaigumangilagut taatsumunga piqurangutitaugasua sivallaayumut taatsumingatua ohawsitsaqalluakainнасигатта исуматааритсаулигитсуталу.
Bill 101, Bill 101, Bill 101, Bill 101.
Taimaisimayok tamanna kavamakkut ohakainarama ippigusutsimangiluarninga ukiuqtatumiunik ammalu piusittinik ohawsittinultuk tukisimanngisutillu ammalu inuusittinik inuutsutta tukisimanngisutik aanninartularialuulooqsimajoq suuqlu kapiyaujaarnasuniallaat uimanaqsiyualuulooqsimajoq.
Aglavi halauqsimagatta tamaani inuikatuttiqatigiinninga allavivunni uteqsimaleraama tamaunga pinasuhativut atinga Mike McCorwick pinasuhativut katimainnahattaleksugu uhaahatigiinnaleksugulu inuhatigiallaganillu uhaahatiqainnahattasunga inuillu katimayeuhativut uhaahatigihattaleksugit inuhativullu uhaahatigihattaleksugit paknaipallialilaqsimavugun hanuilorluta angingiguti minuitsilangavita imminjaulayyung uvangatuinnaulunga uluni pingasunik unnuani pingasunik sineqqajaimalaqsimayunga
angkia pitapanaqpusi kavamapyuavun Inuktitut.
Right away, protests against Bill 101 erupted across Nunavik.
Bonjour mon ami, how are you my friend? Kikelivunivu. Bonjour mon ami, how are you my friend? Kikelivunivu. Donc on prend le français, allez Inuit campagne.
C'est un lundi, le 22 août 1977, et j'arrive à Quebec. Et tout de suite, dans l'après-midi, on me convoque au conseil municipal Inuit. Alors, le conseil communautaire Inuit est dirigé par Robbie Tukaluk. Et il y avait là aussi Noah Nukpuk, Kadek Tukatok et plusieurs autres aussi, là, des conseillers. Et là, on m'a annoncé, ce soir-là, que le lendemain, il allait y avoir une manifestation devant nos bureaux.
Inuit ilagailuit. Taimaimal inututa kutuangap me Inuit amasuloksimaruit ulakut pisusigeetsuta kuopausaneanet pijaksuta tappaunga kupekkaamakkut nunahutinganum.
Alors, le lendemain matin, j'ai réuni tous nos employés, écrits comme Inuit, tous les employés, des Blancs aussi. Alors, j'ai averti tout le monde, vous restez en place. Puis lorsque quelqu'un vous met la main sur l'épaule ou enfin insiste beaucoup, vous sortez. Il ne doit y avoir aucune violence ni rien, vous sortez de vos bureaux.
Uminga uhaloksemarok angalokhangan. Talikkuwanga tikusiguit tikusitwaakut sikisiani anilangavunga. Lamman takkua tililoksemavunga. Inuhadetta ilangenni makmuen longo. Takkuninga talingennem tikusilti. Anitsehutsuit tatsamanga kupekkaamakkut angalokhangan.
Ilinnia vivinermik tupiu ja vinigulo yaaktumik teikunga katilauksimayu Inuit sanasilauksimajut sikutsajavinernik itsivivinernik sikkitaleeritsuit napajunut kikiattusugit
Inuhatigitsuta Nunavimmiutsuta ha ilisimallarittualuulertugu pijumajattini Inuit suuglu utaqqiyuyaaqsutin utaqqiyullutualu hattasimayut hanuiligiaarutiulangajuni utaqqisuti.
In Kutuarapik, Roger Baudouin watched as the Inuit led the police away and closed the police station.
Poliisikko allavengani ukkuaislaurumajut. Ammalu takkua kupekkaamakkila kupekku poliisikkotiin antautsutin.
Oh, alors là, j'ai dit, c'est sérieux, là. Il faut faire quelque chose. J'avais peur que ça dégénère, hein? Alors, j'ai appelé mon patron pour demander est-ce que l'anti-émeute m'a envoyé. J'ai dit, je voulais pas prendre de chance. Alors, finalement, les policiers de l'anti-émeute sont arrivés vers 23 h le soir, dans un avion DC-3. Moi, j'étais allé sur les recevoir, sur le tarmac. Il n'y avait personne, évidemment. Les premiers, ils ont leur matraque et tout, là. Alors, ils sont marchés en peloton jusqu'au poste de police. Et là, ils ont déplacardé, ils ont enlevé le contreplaqué qui était sur le poste de police, puis ils ont pris possession du poste de police.
Inuit soon came out to protest all over Nunavik, but attention soon settled on Fort Chimo.
Allavi haktunut Quebeckut allavinginnut pinaustinginnut takujaulangatiluit natsasugit amiswalutsuta pisusilauksimayugut.
It looked like a parade, but there was real anger in the crowd. The government employees left the offices. Perhaps they were afraid. Then someone had a bright idea.
Pinasu tiit ilangat pihatilauksimayaga allavimmiteikäni pinastio hattasimammigami Quebeckuni. Hawi matsuin lupiukkutingit sunagalangin nanimangata. Hawi magami telex ngunraktawiyumi hano atuktawsungumangan. alla simayuni tuniyaut-suni ukwa aulatigia hasiyati Quebec kawamakut allavinginnut Quebec City-mut ateharumayugu ilitsigi layuni taina aulaitsilausuma.
The telex from Fort Chimo set red lights flashing in Quebec City. The Parti Québécois cabinet had an emergency meeting.
There was a discussion behind the throne, in the National Assembly between the Premier, the Minister of Justice, and the Minister responsible for the Charter. There had been reports of occupying the offices, the government offices, and so on, and even threats, verbal threats, to expel the government representatives, the civil servants, from the offices in Fort Chimo. So it was potentially an anxious moment.
The government decided to dispatch a police riot squad, same as in Kutroarapik. It was a move that would complicate everything in the weeks to come. Using police to enforce a new language? Then David Payne was summoned to an urgent meeting.
And the Premier instructed me to move on the plane very quickly, within an hour or two. I arrived about 8 o'clock in the evening, and first of all wanted to meet the representatives of our government officers and leaders. Secondly, just for a few minutes. And secondly, meet with the police who had been invited to come to establish and assure that there was peace and order in Fort Chimo.
Takwa namay ngitakilok si Mayawat sanak kutigilok dialog sa mata Quebec ka makuno ta makwa polisi sorlo ubagot nukilyalo at dik sinaktualo at timaitu nakata sorlo timaitu yaksuting kan aliway si Mayawat hawigiyawat ta taima.
The news of the riot squad arrival spread like wildfire through Fort Chimo. The reaction was of disbelief, anger, then action.
Kasi ubik kasalo lauk simayu piaga illo angayu piaga lahang ikalwak tilugo. Taina polisi ko illo ma kaiba lauk simayabot hanu illo takata. Taiko ubik kay okaw ti simagalwak sugi suli pabisang musulauk simayu illo yuangan illo at tuyak testik igalangin ni. Taiko nga sangan itutik hanui logan ni kasung kalwak sutik kapiasung kalwak tay layumik tuki hatuin na lauk si mabugut.
It was very tense. People were wondering what was going on. All the national media and some international media were all flooding in.
What other way can we get attention? Tamakwa newspaper lagi, television lagi, amiso alawin, inu nanganot, ay sutella kutra mot ay lauk si mamata. Tagoona pivalli tao na kaya bot ipinalauk si mayong.
In Fort Chimo, the tension continued to build.
You had, I believe, CBS and ABC, some of the main television networks from the United States covering it. You had Stern magazine in Germany. Someone came from Sweden. People came because they didn't understand. If you only had, at the time, I think there were 4,000 Inuit, something like that. How do they threaten, or how can their speaking their own language assimilate Quebecers? It's impossible. So that created a real international situation.
I felt that the Inuit were being abused, in a sense, by the media because it became a kind of a crisis. So I suggested to my colleague, we'll go away for a couple of days to Old Chimo, I think it was, on the other side of the river, and just to let the heads cool a bit.
Una iswi ilaw sa mamilakata David Payne na wiwingot na kanilo English ngot sune. Kikariyaw yung wiwikawa makungin nun. Aliwet to katawalok si mamahalo na ito inaw sune. Pinasutigiyaw sune. Tiliyaw si mat sune.
Some Inuit considered David Payne a Parti Québécois Trojan horse. They didn't trust him.
I said to Charlie Watt that I'd like to go to Inuktitut, and I did.
The community of Inuktitut was the base of the dissidents who had not signed the JBNQA. They were now in court, trying to annul the agreement. There was also personal animosity involved. The government played divide and rule.
Tiliyaw loksima yung asali wangmun. Tay kuninga malekuyot sunga katimalitwak pata nalan niya makanuilo mga tilo. Ukaw sa karomak niya lang otil to ma tay kunanga makibikon na miyunun. Kalo na nguyo tukisimat sa uti loksima yu tay sumani akirari loksima mata Inuit ang katigin ni pityo tigitsugo. Tukisilaok si Mayong anak ko kaya ito nilaok si Mayong ikayok tiging igat akirari igat talo.
Two weeks passed since the government tabled Bill 101. While most of the attention was on the protests, Inuit leaders and PQ ministers sat down to talk.
Inakasit si Hataw mayu yakalwak so tikisiane taman na Inuit inuninga amalo in tamani ukiok tatuminu na bimi inu waswang nebu tukisima yung isuni inakasit si Hataw waswak tu galwat ko amisugalao lok si mayuni ko tilijaw mayun amisugalalo lok si mabugut tilijaw malangalak suta. Well, one of
the first persons that I met was Mary. And I said to Mary, listen, cool it. This is not the end of the world. We'll talk about it. First of all, this law doesn't affect it, doesn't concern you. There's an exclusion in that law. And she kind of take this on board, and then she'd go and meet with her friends and so on, meet with Charlie, and then they come back after they talk to each other and say, no, we know, because you're mentioning our name in that bill, it concerns us. So it was a bit of a problem.
Our leaders found the government's compromise ambiguous. They wanted explicit guarantees on paper that Inuit would be exempted from Bill 101.
The minister responsible, Dr. Lorraine, was very, very much daily in contact.
Suglo isumalagyaw hakto yaktiluta makwa isumangin anyagalatui suglo kamagyaw yakasong mata isumalagyaw tutik.
Tanna kameluran hanuilo katigit sugo hanok uwi bisagalang musuktu yak New York to me piusya hak narayanga itpigilok si malaga sokkoy lagilok si magnitaka tako nga hanuilo kutiga swaktat ni tukisit siya hatakalwak mga yokilok si matangitaka.
Uhauti jaw hatalok si mayugut isumalun ng itokok taman na wigwititiok palianang makunong iliniya tiya pinuil taw sa utigia pilangat swinlo tay meli jaw kala kada kaya may isumagit sa utigilok si makata wigwititu sigit sa utigia halako sila jaw twin nakayahang nebunip ipigusugilok si makata tamat suminga ako takako masimalaw si mangitugon ang igundalaw si manginat tamat suminga tayo sumane.
In the north, the standoff continued.
The offices of TGNQ and the school board will remain closed, and the water delivery will not be picked up by the community council until they have satisfactory meeting with Mr. Levesque, Camille Laurent, and Ward Norman.
Ulluid hatsikiak namata imahangitolak sutilo salmait tolak sutilo Mamaittuulaqsutillu illumi anilaqsimasuit tikku poliisiit sainnaammagijaungi marilaqsimasunga taakkunuunga meemullu tepeti meemullu qaluaqsutik kisiani taimaitsaluni kisianiummat sunami asianik satuutitsaqattanginnata.
In Quebec City, Inuit leaders and government ministers continued to circle each other.
In Quebec City, there was an important meeting after the parties being separated for quite a while. When Charlie Watt came out of the meeting and Minister Lajoie, they had finished the meeting and the media was allowed in, they turned to Mr. Lajoie and asked him, how did the meeting go? And he said, it was fine. I think he even said it was perfect.
Tukisiqatta torikainnatariyara sunauva isumanga sangusimaluiniut tatinnago raanna nuivallialermat taima akimalureasituinnalaqsimayara.
The government stood firm. Our leaders would not back down. With no progress at the table, they went home, leaving the government to ponder the fallout.
Takko Quebec government tukisittigia soareangit piyareakittuungittoq ammalo government inillasimanirijanga tukisimatsugu nammineq nukimik atoronnatuin.
Ila tahatsarutiluunni tahaqatattuinnasarutiluunni uffaluluunni tukisivaallusarutiluunni immaqa tamainni atuloqsimajun.
It was a victory. What happened was that after a few months, 2 amendments were added about the right of the Kativik, Cree, and Naskapi school boards to provide instruction in their Aboriginal languages.
Basically, these indigenous people in Quebec could be taught their own languages in school. One paragraph also said that Inuit and Cree students should be able to go on to higher education in French once they graduated from high school. 2 years had passed since the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement, and the Quebec government had learned another lesson. Do not impose another law or measure on Indigenous people. Colonialism is history.
Inuit too learned a lesson.
My parents would tell me that, going to school is good. I dream that 50 years from now or 60 years from now, I'd like to see real Inuk as a doctor.
Tema Inuitta, Uhausahata, Ilokusahata, Pikusahatalo, Inuktitut, Taman Tungavigiavud. Pigunalagata Inuktitut, Aqua Senawata, Lagunalagota Kisiani, Nipoktumigayagata, Inugumagata, Inukinagumagata.
A full generation after we stood up to Bill 101, we have come out ahead. Nunavimmiut speaking their own language are ready for the future.
Tagamiswalwi inusutut ulumi pingasuni ko hausasungultut tamanna tupak segella simakhoto wattini teitsumanial watuktaw simagalwaktilugo pingasuni hausa hagaya haknitinni tamani Canada mi Quebec milo Nunavimmiut.
Tapanapusi kawama yuabun Inuktitut uhausumi sapusi khuliluting Bonjour mon ami